Hello, friends. So today I'll be talking on this important topic, micronutrients in clinical nutrition. So it's a very important topic. So where we would be covering some of the key micronutrients with a little emphasis on the zinc. So the topics that I would cover is the macronutrient needs in a critically unwell patients or in an ICU patient, and what are the micronutrient needs, and what do we understand by micronutrients. So micronutrients encompass the trace elements and all the vitamins, and what is its role and importance in ICU. And then we will little dwell on the trace elements. What are the key trace elements that we need to remember, and which are relevant and more pertinent to our critically unwell patients, and what are their key functions, and what happens when they're deficient. And we look at the role of zinc in humans because the talk has a little emphasis on zinc. And what are the studies? Have there been any studies done looking at the role of zinc in critically ill patients? And we look at whether zinc has any role in perioperative patients. And we look at whether zinc has any role in burns patient, in sepsis patients, and not to forget the role of zinc in COVID patients. So this is the topics that we would cover. So when you look at the macronutrients, so the gospel comes from the Aspen guidelines. So we have Aspen guidelines, ESPEN guidelines, European guidelines. Then you have from Canadian. So most guidelines, if you look at, Aspen comes from US. So the key thing that you need to remember is the one that is underlined in red. So the number of calories that a patient needs in ICU is around 20 to 30 kilocalories. And the amount of protein, I know this amount of protein that one would need in critically ill is heavily debated. One would argue on a low protein, but you could remember for all the trainings, you could remember the range 1.2 to 2.5 grams per kg per day is the protein that one would need in an ICU. And what you can possibly bear in mind is maybe the early phases you can give less protein, but in the recovery phases, they would possibly benefit from higher protein. And that's what you would see in traumatic brain injury and burns. We tend to give little higher protein. So this is about enteral nutrition. And all the listeners would know that our whole emphasis in intensive care would be on an enteral nutrition. But if for some reason there is absolutely no way we could give enteral, then one would give parenteral nutrition. And in parenteral nutrition, the additional thing one needs to remember is the dextrose that they get. So they get a high dextrose, the 4 to 5 milligrams per kg per minute dextrose one would get if it is a stable. But in sepsis, we should limit this dextrose to less than 4 milligram per kg per minute. And lipid emulsion, in stable, you have 1 gram per kg per day. In critically ill, it should be less than 1 gram per kg. So that, in essence, if you remember, that would be good. And when someone is getting enteral nutrition, so we would expect that most of these electrolytes are delivered in these patients. So, and these are the daily requirements of the electrolytes, calcium, magnesium. So any nutrition should encompass all these electrolytes also constitute an important aspect. So calcium, magnesium, phosphorus, sodium, potassium, acetate, and chloride. So these are some of the electrolytes that one should keep in mind. And these are the daily requirements for parenteral vitamins. So in enteral, our understanding is all these vitamins are part of the enteral diet that is being given. So if you look at any enteral commercially available formulas, all these proteins, all these vitamins would be part of it. So, but when we are giving parenteral nutrition, this has to be added in as an extra. So we would have to supplement all these vitamins when we are giving parenteral. So now coming to trace elements. So if you look at the daily needs of trace elements, and this again becomes pertinent when someone is on a parenteral nutrition. If someone is on enteral nutrition, these trace elements remain part of the dietary supplementation that would give in a commercially available formulas. But if you're giving parenteral nutrition, this has to be given as an additional supplementation. And you can look at the last column that would be more pertinent to in adults. The daily requirement of zinc is 2 to 5 milligram, and copper is 200 to 500 micrograms, manganese 40 to 100, chromium 5 to 15, and selenium 40 to 60. So we'll mainly look at these important trace elements. So it is copper, chromium, manganese, selenium, zinc, and iron. So these are the commoner trace elements that one needs to keep in mind. And these are all important in critically unwell patients. So when we talk about nutrition in critically ill, so we have absolutely no doubt that all our critically unwell patients have to be fed enterally. If suppose they are not able to take orally, then we have to supplement it either through nasogastric tube. If nasogastric tube is not available, then one should make attempts to see if gastrostomy tube can be put. Suppose you are dealing with a corrosive poisoning. Obviously, you would put in a gastrostomy tube and start feeding, or jejunostomy tube, and so on and so forth. So our whole emphasis is on enteral nutrition. For some reason, there's absolutely no way that we could provide enteral nutrition or contraindication, then parenteral nutrition is the way to go. So parenteral nutrition, again, there are two types. The nutrition which could be provided through the central venous catheter, but nowadays you have parenteral nutrition which can be delivered in peripheral catheters, so which we call as peripheral parenteral nutrition or PPN. So either of it one could choose if you are giving parenteral nutrition. So we'll just focus more on micronutrients, because the talk is on micronutrients. So what is the role of micronutrients in nutrition? See, this is a very important thing. Micronutrients are very important. So when we talk about micronutrients, they are trace elements and the other vitamins. These two are quintessential for metabolism and utilization of macronutrients. So for all the listeners, please remember, you need good amount of trace elements, you need good amount of vitamins for the metabolism of protein, for the metabolism of carbohydrates, for the metabolism of fat, and for the metabolism of bone metabolism also. For all these, vitamins and your trace elements are needed. So that is the key quintessential function of these micronutrients. So micronutrients are needed for metabolism of macronutrients. So that's what one needs to remember. And as I said, micronutrients are vitamins, multivitamins and minerals. So when I'm sure many listeners would know in their practice, when someone is on parenteral nutrition, we administer MVI or multivitamin injections every week, and trace elements we inject every week, because they need that for metabolism of others. And this becomes very crucial in any critically unwell patients. And this should not slip out from our mind that supplementation of these micronutrients, which is vitamins and trace elements, is an important aspect of the nutrition. So what does this Aspen guidelines tell us with regards to parenteral? So when someone is on parenteral nutrition, it becomes all the more important that we supplement these micronutrients. And it is mentioned in Aspen guidelines that when someone is needing parenteral nutrition, there is increased oxidative stress and there is a need for these micronutrients. And the question is there a need to provide intravenous micronutrients in critically ill? Yes, daily IV supplementation of vitamins in some form or trace elements may be needed when someone is on parenteral nutrition, especially in parenteral nutrition when they are sick. And which intravenous micronutrients are necessary in burns? So in burns, there is a much bigger loss of these trace elements and vitamins. So higher micronutrient doses are required. Higher doses of vitamins and trace elements may be needed, especially in hypercatabolic state like severe sepsis or in burns, more so in burns patients, and that is what Aspen guidelines suggest. So now coming to trace elements. So as I said, trace elements are iron, chromium, and manganese, selenium, and zinc. So those are the typical trace elements, and they form essential part of micronutrition. So iron, zinc, copper, chromium, manganese, selenium. So these are the typical trace elements that we would pay attention to. And this whole talk is on zinc, so we'll pay little attention on zinc. So zinc is needed for growth, healing, and immune function. So copper is needed for all the connective tissue formation. So it is mainly required for the connective tissue formation. And chromium is a part of the insulin receptor. So the chromium is very useful for the effective functioning of the insulin receptors and the glucose tolerance. So that is where chromium plays a role. And minerals in body, as I said, they are important constituents which are needed to regulate metabolism of macronutrients. And the other key thing of these minerals is these minerals or trace elements have to be provided from outside, because body has no ability to synthesize these trace elements. So we have to supplement these from outside. And what is its role? Its role is for your metabolism of the macronutrients. Mainly for the metabolism within the body, you need these trace elements, and they are also needed for tissue repair, and they're also needed for growth and development. So these are the key component functions of these trace elements. So what about trace elements in critically ill patients? So in critically ill patients, these micronutrients become more deficient. So there can be pre-existing micronutrient deficiency, and if we do not supplement this in a critically unwell patients who have been unwell for a long time, so if there is inadequate or inappropriate administration, then micronutrient deficiency can set in within the critically ill patients if they're not replenished. And these have adverse effect on the biochemical and enzyme function, because as I said, these are needed for the function, for the metabolism of the macronutrients. And this can perpetuate the organ dysfunction, and this can lead to poor wound healing, and it can lead to muscle weakness, and it can lead to neuromuscular disability. Mainly your conscious level can be impaired when there is a significant deficiency of certain trace elements. So micronutrient levels has to be restored, and they have, and their stores have to be replenished, because so the essence is in critically unwell patients, these patients are at a higher risk of depletion of these micronutrients, and replacing them may become essential to optimize the organ function and to enhance the wound healing and the tissue recovery also. Tissue healing also is enhanced with these trace elements. So what does Aspen recommend for parenteral administration for administration parenteral nutrition? So as they say, what are the consensus recommendation for micronutrients? So micronutrients have to be provided every day, especially with an emphasis when they're on parenteral nutrition. The supplementation has to happen regularly. And the rationale as per the Aspen guidelines is the supplementation of trace elements or the micronutrients should happen from day one of initiation of parenteral nutrition. So what it is indicating is our focus on replacing the micronutrients, trace elements and vitamins is more in critically unwell patients, and it is even more in patients who are on parenteral nutrition, and it has to start from day one in parenteral nutrition, vitamins and trace elements. So that is the recommendation from Aspen. So now we'll slowly look into what are the function of these trace elements and what are the symptoms when these trace elements become deficient in critically unwell. So when you look at zinc, I told all these trace elements are needed for metabolism of macronutrients, and they act through lot of enzymes. And these trace elements are required for optimal functioning of lot of enzymes. So zinc is responsible for effective functioning of all these enzymes: carbonic anhydrase, peptidase, alcohol dehydrogenase, alkaline. So all these need zinc for effective functioning. And zinc is needed, as I said, for metabolism of macronutrients, which is useful for metabolism of protein, carbohydrate, lipid, and bone metabolism. So zinc is an essential component for metabolism of these macronutrients. And when zinc becomes deficient, one could have alopecia, and they can have depression. So they can have a lot of glossitis or stomatitis, and they can have a lot of anorexia, nausea, vomiting, and they can have poor wound healing. Wound healing is not effective. And zinc has a role on immune modulation also. There can be immune suppression, and they can have chronic diarrhea. So especially in patients with bowel disorders, you would see very often zinc has to be replaced or replenished because they will be deficient in zinc. So um, it is a cause and effect. So diarrhea also depletes zinc, and zinc deficiency also can worsen diarrhea. So one has to replace the zinc. So those are some of the features of zinc deficiency. And these are some of the cutaneous manifestations of zinc. So you have this crusted erythematous plaques in chronic zinc deficiency. So you can have a lot of these lesions in the skin. So a lot of skin manifestations can occur with zinc deficiency. So then we'll move to the copper. So copper is needed for enzymatic function of these enzymes: ceruloplasmin, monoamino oxidase, cytochrome oxidase, ascorbic acid oxidase, dopamine beta hydroxylase. So all these enzymes need good copper levels for effective functioning of these enzymes. And copper is needed for metabolism of connective tissue. So it is very useful for connective tissue metabolism and bone metabolism. And most important function of copper is for the hemopoiesis, for the bone marrow function of producing hematopoietic stem cells, which leads to good production of leukocytes, RBCs, and platelets. So this is where copper levels are essential because copper deficiency can lead to anemia and all the cell line deficiency can happen. And when the copper is deficient, there can be thinning of this bony mantle. And when there is a copper deficiency, there can be reduction of all the cell lines, RBCs, neutrophils, and all the WBCs. All these cells can become, all the cell lines can become deficient. So that is a very important aspect of copper. So we'll move into chromium. So chromium is very important for as a glucose tolerance. And if you see the previous one of the previous slides I mentioned, it is needed for good function of the insulin receptors for the insulin uptake and regulation of the glucose level. So chromium is needed for as a glucose tolerance factor. And again, chromium is involved in metabolism of all macronutrients, protein, carbohydrate, lipid, and connective tissue. And if you have chromium deficiencies, glucose intolerance happens and glycemic levels may go heavy. And there can be increase in the free fatty acids because it is involved in the lipid metabolism. There can be negative nitrogen balance. And chromium deficiency leads to reduction in the respiratory quotient. And it can lead to weight loss and it can lead to peripheral neuropathy. So it can worsen diabetic neuropathy. So that's why in diabetics with neuropathy, chromium levels become important. And some of the multivitamins one would give in diabetic neuropathy is to possibly circumvent this because chromium deficiency can lead to severe neuropathy. So let's look at selenium. Selenium is needed for effective functioning of these enzymes, glutathione peroxidase and 5D iodinase. And selenium is very important for conversion of T4 to T3. And the deficiency of selenium causes cardiomyopathy. I'm sure many of the listeners would know. And it can lead to nail bed whitening is caused by selenium deficiency. And selenium deficiency causes lower limb myopathy and lower limb pains. So it can cause severe myalgia, predominantly the lower extremities. So these are some of the manifestations of selenium deficiency. Now we look at manganese. So manganese is needed for effective function of these enzymes, arginase, pyruvate carboxylase, superoxide dismutase, and glycosyl transferase. Again, if you see the common thing that you can say is all these trace elements are needed for metabolism of your macronutrients, protein, lipids, and another important function of manganese is it is very essential for reproduction and immunity and bone metabolism. So protein, carbohydrate, fat metabolism, connective tissue, and bone metabolism remains the gist of all these trace elements. And chromium with special reference to the glucose insulin receptor activity, and manganese for the fertility aspect because it has a role to play in the reproduction, and zinc for growth and wound healing. So that is the gist of the whole trace elements you could remember. So manganese deficiency leads to deformity of the bones, and it can lead to a lot of free fatty accumulation in the liver and increase in the alkaline phosphatase. And manganese deficiency is known to reduce the activity of the beta cells to produce insulin. So even like chromium, manganese has some role on the beta cell function in the pancreas, and it can lead to sterility because it has an effect on the reproductive functions. So manganese deficiency can lead to sterility. So this is in essence the role of manganese. So now we'll move to what are the challenges in administering intravenous micronutrients. So the whole challenge is there is no homogeneous availability of all these micronutrients that are available commercially to administer. And we do not have individual IV micronutrients that are available. Suppose if you want to supplement only chromium, we may not have only chromium available to supplement, or we may not have only zinc. They're all available in combination. And we do not have individual zinc availability or iodine or selenium availability. So they all are available in combination. And another problem with oral supplementation is if we provide zinc oral supplementation, only 20 to 40% is absorbed. But if IV formulation is available, 100% will be absorbed. So now the reason for this talk is IV zinc is made available now, first time in our country. And the whole understanding is it has a better bioavailability and it could be considered in certain clinical situation, which we'll talk about. So now we'll move to the whole focus on zinc. So we won't talk in detail about the other trace elements because this whole talk is with emphasis on zinc. So what is the role of zinc in humans? I told you briefly already. So zinc has multimodal effects. So it has effect on T cell and B cell function and on antibody production. And as I said, zinc has a very important role in the wound healing or the tissue healing and for regeneration of the tissues. So it becomes very important. And zinc has a role on the inner ear function also and the olfactory function. Zinc has effect on the cardiovascular health in maintaining the stability of the blood pressure and mucociliary clearance. And zinc also has a role on insulin receptor like chromium. And manganese has an effect on beta cells. Chromium has an effect on the insulin receptors. Even zinc has an effect on the insulin receptor function and the insulin storage and secretion. And what are the dietary sources of zinc? So for all the non-vegetarians, I think the highest source of zinc is found in the meat. So it is found first highest levels are found in oysters, followed by the beef and followed by the chicken leg. And for the vegetarian, it is the tofu and the hemp seeds. And all the lentils have good amount of zinc and yogurt has the zinc and mushrooms and oatmeals. But the highest would be present in the seafood like oysters and chicken and pork and beef. So another important entity that one should be aware of zinc is zinc binds to phytates and it forms a irreversible complex, and this phytate prevent the absorption of zinc into the cells. So that is something which we need to keep in mind. And the food products which are high in phytates are all the seeds and the legumes like the beans and other things. So these are some of the food items which have a high phytate levels. So if these are consumed, so then what happens is this could possibly lead to zinc deficiency because these phytates present in these bind to the zinc. So the way to reduce its action is by soaking them in water. By soaking these beans or these legumes in water, the phytates come down, and that will reduce the phytate level, which would facilitate your zinc absorption. So that is something one needs to keep in mind. So let's look into the zinc homeostasis. The serum zinc levels is only 0.1%. So zinc is present only 0.1% in the serum. 60% of the zinc is present in the muscle, 30% is present in the bone, 5% is present in the liver, and 5% is present in the skin. And as I said, zinc is only 40 to 50% is absorbed, and predominantly it is absorbed from the duodenum and jejunum. And 80% of the zinc is bound to the albumin and 20% is bound to alpha macroglobulin. So this is the binding of zinc. So now we'll talk about zinc deficiency. So if you look globally, so zinc is very much deficient in our India and most of the African countries and some of these South Asian countries. But you see the zinc deficiency is not very much prevalent in Europe and America and even Australasia. And it is claimed that 30 to 40% of the Indians are deficient in zinc. And this is the age-wise deficiency of zinc. As you see, the pregnant women and the tribal women were more significantly deficient in zinc as compared to other age groups. So this is something which is important for us to bear in mind. So now we'll move into the studies, whether zinc replenishment has any role to play in critically, because we are interested in ICU patients, whether zinc deficiency has a role. So this was a study by Haaland et al. As you know, he's a Canadian group, which has come out with a meta-analysis looking at whether zinc has any role in critically unwell patients. So this was a meta-analysis of 4 randomized controlled trials, and the study was done in mechanically ventilated critically ill patients, and they found zinc supplementation in critically unwell patients reduced the mortality, reduced the ICU length of stay, reduced the infections, and improved the wound healing. So this is what this study showed. And let's look into some of the older studies. This was a Young et al. Study from US, where 68 patients were looked, where one group got zinc and one group was control group. They looked at mortality at 1 month. It was less in the zinc group as compared to the control group. And they looked at the neurological recovery, Glasgow outcome score, and it was significantly improved in patients who were administered or who were supplemented with zinc. And even that significance remained at day 15 and day 12. And this was another study from Germany, Berger et al., where they looked at 20 burns patients and they found the risk of infections at 30 days. And they found the infection risk was significantly less in the group which got zinc as compared to the control group. And the duration of antibiotics also was significantly less in patients who got zinc as compared to the control group. So this was again by Berger et al. In 2007, who did a study in 21 burns patients where they had burns more than 20%, and 11 patients got zinc, 10 were in control group. Again, the infections, if you look, was significantly less in the group which got zinc as compared to the control group, and improved wound healing happened in more in patients with zinc as compared to the control group, and ICU length of stay also was significantly less in the group which got zinc. So that's about the Haaland study, which looked into all the 4 randomized controlled trials. Now we look into the perioperative conditions. So this was the study which came in the patients who underwent colorectal cancer, patients who underwent surgery. So they divided patients into 2 groups. Group A got peripheral parenteral nutrition with multivitamins and with trace elements. They got zinc 3 to 5 milligrams per day. And group B got only peripheral parenteral nutrition. And this was a cross-sectional study. And the study population was, they took patients who were at a higher nutritional risk, who underwent laparoscopic surgery and who were administered peripheral parenteral nutrition. So group A was the one which got zinc, group B did not get. And they looked at the infection risk. It was significantly less in group A as compared to the group B, although it was not statistically significant. But this was interesting. Anastomotic leak was significantly less in patients who got zinc as compared to the one which did not get zinc. And hospital length of stay also was significantly less compared to the one which did not get zinc. And white cell count and CRP was higher in the group B, which only got nutrition. And conclusions they made was, in these surgical patients who underwent laparoscopic surgery who were at a higher nutritional risk, no zinc had higher anastomotic leak and higher length of stay and higher infection rate. So we looked into this study in burns, whether zinc has a role. This was a Swiss study where they divided the patients into 2 groups. One group was called group TE, which got trace elements. They got zinc, copper, and selenium. And group V was the vehicle group. They called it as a vehicle group. We did not get these trace elements. This was a prospective randomized placebo-controlled trial. The inclusion criteria was patients with burns who were admitted within 6 hours and who had more than 20% of the burn surface area, body surface area burns. So they had 21 patients. Group TE is the trace element group and group V is the vehicle group. Wound healing, as you see, was much better. So this wound healing, they looked at the number of grafts needed per percentage body surface area. If it is less, then the healing was happening better. So as you see, it was less in trace elements as compared to the group. Means the number of grafts per percentage body surface area was less. It means the healing happened much better. So they needed less grafts. So 94 versus 144. And infection risk also was significantly less in trace element group as compared to the control group. And they looked at pulmonary infections. 27 pulmonary infections were there. It was significantly less in the trace elements group as compared to the vehicle group. So what about the role of zinc in sepsis? So this was a German study. So this was a prospective observational single center study. So they looked at surgical sepsis and healthy patients, and they looked at the role of zinc. And here they measured the serum zinc level, and they found in healthy individuals, they had a much higher zinc levels as compared to the patients with sepsis, where the zinc levels were lower. And this had a bearing on or correlation with higher hospital mortality. And here they looked at survivors and non-survivors. There were 36 survivors and 8 non-survivors, and they measured the serum zinc level. And they found in survivors, the serum zinc levels was higher as compared to the non-survivors. It was 5 to 2.08, which means the non-survivors had lesser zinc levels as compared to the survivors. And these survivors had faster recovery and better recovery from sepsis. Again, goes into show that even in sepsis patients, the zinc levels will be depleted. And we have to look at some trials which tell us whether replenishing these zinc levels will enhance the recovery or improve the outcome. And again, here this basic graph shows that recurrent sepsis also was more common in patients who were zinc deficient. So we looked at the critically unwell patients. So we looked at sepsis patients. We looked at peri-op patients. We looked at burns patients, and not to forget our COVID. So this study came from India. So in COVID, whether zinc had any bearing. So this was a prospective observational study. They looked at fasting zinc levels. So the study was done between 17th to 27th May 2020, and they found that 57.4% of the COVID infections were deficient in zinc. And here they saw these patients who had zinc deficiency had higher complications with COVID. So the ARDS, they looked at patients who were deficient in zinc as compared to the patients who had normal zinc, and they found ARDS was more in zinc deficient individuals in COVID as compared to the patients who had normal COVID levels. And hypotension was more in zinc deficient individuals as compared to the normal zinc. IL-6 levels were high in zinc deficient level as compared to the normal zinc. Hospital length of stay also was more in zinc deficient than the normal zinc. And steroid use, obviously, when they develop ARDS and they're sick, you would use steroids. Steroid use also was more in zinc deficient. And ICU requirement also was more in zinc deficient individuals. So all in all, so these are all these early studies which are telling us that critically unwell patients or sick patients have lower zinc levels, and maybe replenishing these zinc levels may have some bearing on the outcome. But as I said, we need more studies. So this whole narrative is like vitamin D, because we know in critically unwell patients or more sicker patients, vitamin D will be low. But whether replacing vitamin D will change the outcome, we do not have an answer. So would be a similar thought process with zinc also. So we understand that in burn, zinc will be low. In perioperative surgical patients, zinc possibly will be low. In critically unwell patients, zinc possibly is low. Sepsis patients. So in critically unwell patients, this whole narrative will re-emphasize our thought that maybe we should measure zinc levels and do some big randomized control trial to see replenishing this zinc, whether it would have a favorable influence on improving the outcome is what needs to be seen. But at the end of the whole narrative, the listeners should bear in mind that zinc also has an important role on the uptake of macronutrients, because it has a role in the metabolism of the macronutrients, and it has a role on certain enzymatic functions and insulin functions and wound healing. So to that effect, more studies have to be done looking at the role. And we are looking at doing a study in our own sepsis patients because the IV formulation of zinc is right now available. So we would want to possibly measure zinc levels and supplement it and compare it with the cohort who haven't got zinc and see whether it has influence on the outcome. So thank you very much. So we end with this important note. So we'd forgive most things if we knew the facts. So thank you all.